We now have three great powers, the US, Russia and China. You need to include India as one of great powers as well. 1.5 billion people of population, the highest growth rate among the major economies. Your speech in this audience brings along the memories of your Munich conference speech in 2007. Indeed, the world order stopped being unipolar. We now have three great powers, the US, Russia and China. It seems that these countries will compete against each other. A hot war between them is unlikely because each of them have weapons of mass destruction. However, trade wars have already been started by the West. And that might evolve into financial wars. Therefore, my question, Mr. President, is Russia prepared for such evolution of events, especially if these wars are long-term? Or what do you think the world order has another scenario of development? Thank you. First thing, you need to include India as one of great powers as well. 1.5 billion people of population, the highest growth rate among the major economies, ancient culture and so on, and the future, good future for growth. There are other fast-developing countries that naturally will be among those states that have great influence on the current policy on global development and on the future of humankind as well. Look what's happening with Indonesia, 300 million. And look at some African countries. Saudi Arabia is also playing a very big role in global energy. This single point is quite enough. One movement, one word of the Crown Prince is enough to have an impact on global energy markets. Tremendous influence. Now, as for those countries that you have mentioned, you spoke about rivalry between them. You know, healthy competition is always good. It never was detrimental to anyone. I'm not giving an ironic comment here. It brings to life the internal forces of each country. It helps propel its development. Monopoly is bad. But over the pond, they say that there is just one good case of monopoly, when the monopoly is good, when its own monopoly. But it's a joke, because that's also bad. It undermines the core, the internal energy of growth for those who have the control over the monopoly. So there is nothing bad here. The thing is that this natural competition should not evolve into an aggression of one country against another. Most importantly, that the agreements elaborated and agreed upon by all stakeholders, agreed, the rules that they have agreed upon, not that someone invented, these rules must be observed so that these limitations and sanctions that we're calling illegitimate, that are not used and applied as a tool for competition. Why am I calling them illegitimate? Because they run counter to international norms. For example, WTO. That's why they're illegitimate. That is an apparent thing. They're being politicized and later used for competitive advantage. Introduction of sanctions against Russia or against China quite often bounce back on those who use them. The US and China have a tremendous volume of economic cooperation. Well, sanctions were applied against China. What's next? possibly they shot themselves in the foot. Look at Europe. They're limiting some Chinese goods. They introduced certain blocks. Europeans have recognized themselves. There were two sources: cheap energy from Russia and cheap goods of consumer market from China. So what will happen next? If they cut off one thing, they voluntarily turned off our energy resources, relatively cheap, and now we see that it's balancing on recession. If they now abandon relatively cheap Chinese goods, they would have inflation. The same would happen in the US. They have quite enough issues on their plate. They have a triple deficit, 34 billion of debt, external trade deficit, and so on. They have budget deficit. I think it stands at about 6%. We, with all limitations that they try to introduce, our deficit stands at less than 2%, and they have 6%. They undermine their own development and their institutions for development. Therefore, healthy competition, yes, it's only natural and possible. Using illegal tools for competitive advantage is bad, and it will be to the detriment of those who use it. And I hope that this awareness will sink in at a healthy political level, and we'll have a possibility to agree on everything. And the way to do it is what I've mentioned in my speech.